Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another video. Guys, we are sitting down here in the basement bait shop doing a little maintenance. I don't know, you probably can see maybe a little bit of the window. It is raining outside, a cold, miserable spring day here in Wisconsin, which means I'm down here doing a little bit of maintenance. You can see I've got 3 rods in the drying rack. These are 3 rods that I did repair work on. And it's one of those things, they all needed something different. One needed a new tip, one had a double-footed guide get smashed, and then the other one had the butt grip, or the butt of the rod get smashed. So I inserted a graphite tube into that, brought the rod back to life. One of the joys of knowing how to repair rods slash build rods, you get to really increase the life of them. You know, this rod right here is a discontinued blank that I trying to do everything I can to make it last longer. It's the old discontinued MHX HMMB 874. Fantastic rod series. Actually, this one too is that discontinued HMMB 873. So it's same blank, one power lighter. But 2 of my favorite blanks that I've ever used. So I'm really trying to make them last a little bit longer, baby them a little bit in terms of how I care for them. But if you don't know how to repair rods, you really should look into it. Extremely easy to do. The problem is once you kind of learn the simple steps to repair individual guides and tips, you might go down the rat hole of building your own rods, which is a phenomenal fun path to take, but you can become kind of addicted to it. Anyways, a little bit of a rant there. What I wanted to address today were a couple of comments I've gotten recently regarding leaders. So, I would say in today's time, with respect to a lot of different fishing techniques, the majority anglers out there are using a leader to a main line. So, I would say that in most instances, it's a pretty good route to go. There are times I prefer to use just straight whatever line that is. So if I'm frogging or pitching into heavy cover, I'll throw straight braid. If I'm fishing a lot of top waters, I'll throw straight monofilament. If I'm fishing, say, jerk baits or swim baits, a lot of times I'll just fish straight fluorocarbon. The majority of my finesse fishing, though, specifically with my spinning gear, I would say 90% of the time I've got a braided main line to a fluorocarbon leader. So the first question that I got had to do with if you throw, say, a 10-pound leader, how heavy should your main line be? And this, I feel like this is kind of a misconception in the sport, that the idea being that if you have a leader of a certain pound test, say 10-pound test, that your main line has to be heavier. Like you just go from a heavier main line to a lighter leader. And that's very much not true in my opinion. I typically put 10-pound braid as my main line on all of my spinning reels. And then I'll change my leader poundage, which is almost always fluorocarbon, unless I'm throwing a topwater, I guess. But I'll change that leader poundage from 4-pound all the way up to, say, 15-pound. So in a lot of instances, I'm throwing a leader that is slightly heavier, 12 or 15-pound, over my 10-pound braided main line. And the reason for that just has to do with the cover that I'm fishing. If I'm fishing cover that requires a little bit heavier pound test, I will upgrade to it without having to change your braided main line. In fact, having a smaller diameter main line allows you to have better casting length, a lot of times better accuracy. You can put more line on your reels. Like, there's a lot of benefits to keeping a smaller main line, in my case, 10-pound braided main line. But I don't want you to think you have to have a heavier main line than whatever leader length you're using. With that 10-pound braid, like I said, I have no problem going to a much, much lighter leader, 4 or 6-pound fluorocarbon, and I have no problem going with a heavier leader. So that's the first question that I wanted to address, that I think a lot of people feel like you have to be upsizing your main line over your leader, but that's not the case. The second had to do with what leader length I like to use. And I've talked about this on the channel before, but I think it's worth addressing again. Generally speaking, my leader length is going to be at that 10-foot mark minimum. So if I'm fishing 10 foot of water or less, I'll generally have 10 foot of leader length. If I'm fishing deeper than 10 foot, I generally will fish the same, try to have like roughly the same depth. So if I'm in 15 foot of water, I'll have a 15-foot leader. If I have 20 foot of water, I'll have a 20-foot leader. And the idea there is I generally want to have my bait have a leader length that separates my main line from my bait. And the reason for that, and I realize just if I'm fishing 10 foot of water, my braid is still going to be in the water at relatively some form of an angle towards my bait. But I do it because I truly believe that fish can sense the braid better than, say, fluorocarbon. And it's not as clear. It doesn't disappear as well in the water in terms of a visual aspect. And I personally feel like braids, especially the lower strand braids, like a 4 or a 5 or a 6 strand, which are a little bit more jagged, a little bit more saw-like, in my opinion, they give off a little bit more vibration in the water that the fish can pick up on. So I like to remove my braid from my bait if possible. So if I'm fishing, say I'm skipping a wacky rig under docks that are 4 foot of water, well, if I've got a 10-foot leader, there's a good chance that my braid will still be on the surface of the water and away from having an impact on that fish. It's personal preference. If I get to the point where I'm fishing deeper than 20 foot, generally I won't go any bigger than a 20-foot leader. For me, I know that that's roughly 3 strands of line when I pull it off, and that's where I'll tie it on. So my leaders are going to vary from 15 to 20 foot. The other factor that I take into account is one, the cover that I'm fishing, as well as water clarity. The dirtier the water, the shorter I feel like my leader can go, as well as the heavier the cover. So even if I'm fishing really clear water, but say I'm skipping something back into some bushes or under docks, even if it's really deep, I'll still probably shorten my leader up to that 10-foot mark, just because the braid is a little bit better in terms of being abrasion resistant and it doesn't break as much. So that's a key as well. The other thing I want to address that I get questions on is the type of line that I use for my leaders. I've had people ask me if I ever use braid as a leader. I've had people ask me if I ever use monofilament as a leader. And generally speaking, my go-to for leaders is going to be fluorocarbon. 9 times out of 10, it's fluorocarbon. So for all of my finesse presentations, that's what I'm going to be using. The one time I do throw some monofilament is if I've got a bait, some form of topwater that I want to keep on the surface, or even occasionally if I'm fishing, say a floating worm or some other plastic that I also want to keep a little bit higher up in the water column. But generally speaking, it's going to primarily be fluorocarbon. I do feel like the low stretch helps with hook sets. I feel like it is a little bit more invisible to the fish, if you want to put it that way. The diameter is a little bit smaller. I think that the memory on it is better, meaning I have less coiling of it, and my line generally lays a little bit straighter, which allows me better sensitivity, better feel. So from that standpoint, I prefer fluorocarbon, but if I am throwing topwaters, I will throw some monofilament as a leader. And from a braid standpoint, if I were ever to want a braid leader, I would just fish straight braid. There'd be no reason, in my opinion, to go with a different backing to a braid leader. So that, hopefully that answers the questions. I've gotten a lot of different questions on this, and I think it is because it's something that is becoming more acceptable. I feel like at one point, a lot of the anglers that were using different leader material were more tournament grade anglers, but it's become much more mainstream now, where a lot of people have these questions because they're doing it and they're seeing the benefits of using leader. I gotta say, if you're using a backing, for a main line, so say your braid, you're going to spend a heck of a lot less money on your line throughout the course of a year. So I do think that there's a ton of benefits. Plus, I think that in some instances, most instances, you'll get a lot more benefits to sensitivity, especially with your finesse applications. But I hope this answers the questions that I've gotten. I appreciate all of you out there that are providing me with the questions, because it creates good opportunity to discuss it on the channel like this. And hopefully other people are learning as well based on this. So let me know in the comment section. Do you have any other little tidbits that you want to throw on regarding leaders and leader links and leader types and all of that? Because I'd love to see what you guys have to offer too. So thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. I'm going to get back to fixing 2 more rods, and we'll see you tomorrow.